Now watch out, the Australian Tax Office is putting soldiers, cafes and tradies, you're all on notice as we all start to file our tax returns.
The ATO will be targeting these groups and others in a campaign to make sure everyone is paying their fair share of tax. Robert Jeremenko is the Senior Tax Counsel at the Tax Institute and he joins us now from Sydney. Robert Jeremenko, good morning. Well, cafes, soldiers, tradies, why?
Well, the Tax Office is really being very proactive and upfront in releasing its compliance program, and it's setting out those particular areas of the law that it will be focusing on, and particular industries, to give people a heads up. So that's a really positive thing.
Looking at cafes and tradies in the first instance, I suppose what the Tax Office is really concerned about is the burgeoning cash economy in Australia.
Well, the important thing to remember, and the Tax Office does acknowledge this, is that the vast majority of people do abide by the law. People don't try and avoid their tax obligations, and that's a good thing. But that makes it all the more important for them to focus on those areas where people may be out of the system and avoiding tax, and it's a good thing for them to crack down on that.
Practically and hypothetically, say if I'm a cafe owner and if I wanted to avoid paying tax, how would I go about it? What strategies would the Tax Office use to try to chase me down?
So you're right, the Tax Office has highlighted cafes as one of the areas that it has noticed there's potential for fraud in the tax system, and basically because it's such a cash-based industry, people are usually just paying cash for their coffee or their breakfast on the run, so it's a lot easier in some cases for people operating in a cash industry to potentially not be reporting the right amount of tax. So what the Tax Office will be doing is comparing the sales from coffee suppliers with what cafe owners are reporting as income, and that's one of the areas that the Tax Office can use. It's some 600 million different pieces of information that it gathers each year.
Wow, but the thing is, you know, if I go and pay $3.50 or $4 in cash for a coffee, that cafe owner doesn't have to report that income.
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with paying cash. Of course, it's an important part of our economy. It'll remain for a long time. But the reality is that in a cash-based industry, that particular store that you've gone to has the potential to be a little tempted and not record all of that income. So that's where the Tax Office is putting those industries on notice and making sure that they'll focus on that in the year coming.
OK, let's look at soldiers now. What are they potentially doing wrong?
So basically that the Tax Office is also focusing on areas such as plasterers having reported some details from the recent Queensland floods. The Tax Office has noticed that that's a particular industry that they need to have a look at. Again, an industry where cash is prevalent, and an area that they'll be focusing on to make sure that all of the income is recorded and deductions aren't inflated.
And soldiers, what's the area of concern there?
With the Defence Forces, it's particularly on work-related expenses, and the Tax Office is saying that it's a particular industry that has a tendency to have a high claim for work-related expenses, and so they're just making sure and giving people plenty of notice that they will be having a look and making sure that all of the receipts are kept for those expenses.
Is it, and you know, you don't have to answer this, of course, is it politically touchy, though, to go after members of the Defence Force when, of course, we're fighting a war in Afghanistan?
Well, of course, the Tax Office needs to make sure that the law is enforced in every area, and they've actually said that Defence Force officers who are non-commissioned are particularly in their sights, and that's appropriate. I mean, everyone has to pay their fair share, and Defence Force officers are no exception. OK, very good advice, Robert Jeremenko. We'll leave it there. Thank you. Thank you.
I had a rather cheeky tweet to say if the Defence Force only provided good kit, they wouldn't have to go and buy their own.